At 75 years old, Jeff Bridges has long been more than a film star. He's a beacon, a legend, an icon. Yet behind that luminous aura, something cracked deep within. A tragedy has unfolded, far beyond the glare of spotlights and red carpets. Something so quietly anguished, so profoundly painful, that the very idea seems impossible for a man who appears larger than life. In this video, we will trace the arc of a man who danced with stardom for decades. Gifted, adored, seemingly invincible. And yet, age does not spare even legends. At 75, Jeff Bridges faces a horror no performance could ever prepare him for. There is heartbreak here, real and relentless. A story that will challenge your assumptions, move your heart, and haunt your thoughts. We will walk with him from his earliest days, through triumphs and private joys, into the shadows of suffering, and finally, confront the devastating truth. Don't turn away. What follows is more than the story of a star, it is the unraveling of a life. Before Jeff Bridges became the cinematic force the world would come to admire, he was first a boy growing up in the long shadow of Hollywood's golden age. A child of two remarkable parents whose world revolved around lights, cameras, and quiet lessons about the power of storytelling. Born on December 4, 1949, in Los Angeles, California, Jeffrey Leon Bridges entered a world already shaped by fame and film. His father, Lloyd Bridges, was a seasoned actor known for his charismatic presence and powerful performances in both film and television. His mother, Dorothy Dean Bridges, was a talented actress and writer, but more importantly, the moral and emotional anchor of the Bridges household. Together, they represented a rare blend of Hollywood glamour and grounded family devotion. The Bridges home wasn't like most others. Conversations over breakfast might shift from grocery lists to dialogue rehearsals. Family dinners could turn into spontaneous acting workshops, where Lloyd and Dorothy encouraged their children to explore emotion, vulnerability, and truth. Dorothy once described their household as a place where art and life held hands, and that balance became the compass for her children. Jeff's older brother, Beau Bridges, was his first mentor and lifelong inspiration. Beau, already paving a path as a young actor in the 1950s, showed Jeff what it meant to live with both ambition and humility. The brothers shared more than blood. They shared a rhythm, a curiosity, and a mutual respect for the craft of storytelling. Jeff often referred to Beau as the hero in my early life, admitting that many of his instincts on set came from watching Beau navigate the industry with quiet grace. Even at an early age, Jeff could sense that the entertainment business wasn't just a career, it was an inheritance, a sacred family language passed down from one generation to the next. Growing up in the heart of Hollywood could have easily turned any child into a caricature of privilege. But Dorothy and Lloyd were careful to shield their children from the darker sides of fame. They didn't want Jeff or Beau to see acting as a means to vanity, but as a channel for empathy. Jeff's earliest memories were filled with set visits and studio lights. He remembered the smell of makeup rooms, the heavy silence before the director's cue, and the gentle hum of old film cameras. To him, movie sets were playgrounds, places where imagination had no boundaries. Despite his famous surname, Jeff's upbringing was remarkably grounded. The Bridges family valued honesty over appearances, emotion over ego. Dorothy, a woman of deep sensitivity and discipline, instilled in her children the importance of kindness, respect, and emotional truth. She often told Jeff, "Don't act, just be." That simple piece of advice would later define his entire career. Still, there was something different about Jeff even then. Teachers at school noticed his natural ease with people, his ability to make others laugh and feel at ease. He wasn't the loudest or the most competitive, but he carried a quiet magnetism, a kind of stillness that made others want to listen. That quality would later become one of his greatest strengths as an actor. Jeff's first experience in front of the camera came at a tender age. He made appearances on his father's hit television series Sea Hunt, 1958 to 1961, often alongside Beau. For Jeff, it wasn't just play, it was training. He learned by observation, studying the way Lloyd handled direction, the professionalism on set, and the invisible line between the man and the character. By his teens, Jeff had developed an instinctive understanding of the camera's gaze. He knew how to move within a frame without overacting, a subtlety rare for young performers. Yet, despite his natural talent, Jeff was hesitant to commit fully to acting. He wanted to explore other passions, art, painting, and especially music. He played guitar and wrote songs, and there was a part of him that dreamed of being on stage not as an actor, but as a musician. His parents, however, never pressured him. Lloyd would say, "Follow your joy, and the rest will come." Dorothy encouraged exploration, knowing that every creative pursuit would eventually enrich his acting. After graduating from high school, Jeff considered skipping college to dive into music. But life, as always, had other plans. He attended the Herbert Berghof Studio in New York City, studying method acting and immersing himself in the emotional depth of performance. There, he began to understand acting not as performance, but as presence. It was less about pretending and more about truth. In his early 20s, he landed roles in minor films, but his first major breakthrough came in 1971, when he starred in Peter Bogdanovich's The Last Picture Show. The film, a raw and haunting depiction of small-town loneliness, earned Jeff an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Practically overnight, the boy who had once shadowed his father on sets became one of Hollywood's most promising young actors. That role marked the end of innocence and the beginning of legacy. From then on, Jeff Bridges was no longer simply Lloyd Bridges' son. He was a star in his own right. But even as fame found him, the lessons of his childhood, family, humility, authenticity, would stay embedded in his heart. He had no idea then that the foundation built during those early years would one day become his lifeline in the darkest period of his life. The early 1970s marked the beginning of a dazzling ascent that would shape Jeff Bridges into one of the most distinctive actors of his generation. Hollywood, still basking in the afterglow of its golden years, was now giving birth to a new kind of star, one less concerned with glamour and more with authenticity. Jeff was the embodiment of that change, effortless, natural, unpredictable, and real. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Jeff Bridges had fully transitioned from promising newcomer to respected leading man. Yet even as his fame grew, he resisted the temptation to conform to Hollywood's image of stardom. Behind the characters and the fame, behind the applause and camera flashes, Jeff Bridges remained, at his heart, a man of immense warmth and humanity. For decades, he lived with a rare balance, an artist who thrived in the limelight but never became consumed by it. To those who knew him personally, Jeff was far more than the Hollywood star the world admired. He was a husband, father, musician, painter, philosopher, and a deeply spiritual soul who valued simplicity over stardom. For Jeff, love did not come as another Hollywood script. It came as something far more real, far more unexpected. In the mid-1970s, while filming the movie Rancho Deluxe in Montana, Jeff met Susan Jeston, a young waitress working near the film's location. She wasn't part of the Hollywood crowd. She had a quiet confidence, a kind smile, and a grounded spirit that disarmed him instantly. Jeff was captivated. Yet when he first asked her out, she refused, twice. But Jeff, ever the believer in timing and persistence, didn't give up. Weeks later, fate intervened. They met again at a local gathering, and something shifted. This time, she said yes. What began as a simple dance soon blossomed into a lifelong partnership built on respect, laughter, and resilience. They married in 1977, and together, they raised 3 daughters, Isabel, Jessica, and Haley. Jeff often described his family as his greatest masterpiece. Despite his demanding film schedule, he never lost sight of home. His daughters grew up surrounded not by fame, but by music, creativity, and unconditional love. In interviews, Jeff frequently credited Susan as his anchor, the person who kept him humble and steady through the storms of celebrity life. "She gives me perspective," he once said. "When I come home from a long shoot, she reminds me that what matters most isn't what's on the screen, it's what's right here." Even after decades of marriage, the couple remained deeply connected, often seen holding hands at public events. To Jeff, true love wasn't about the fairy tale perfection the movies promised. It was about choosing each other again and again, through every hardship, every joy, and every heartbreak. Acting was only one part of Jeff Bridges' artistic soul. His passions reached far beyond the screen, touching every corner of creative expression. Music, in particular, was his first love. Long before fame, Jeff had been a guitarist and songwriter, inspired by blues, folk, and rock. Over the years, he would blend that passion with his screen career, releasing several albums and performing live with remarkable sincerity. His debut album, Be Here Soon 2000, showcased his poetic lyricism and his deep, gravelly voice, a sound that seemed to carry decades of wisdom and wonder. Later, after his acclaimed role as Bad Blake in the film Crazy Heart, 2009, for which he finally won his long-deserved Academy Award for Best Actor, music became even more intertwined with his identity. The film's story of a weary country musician felt almost autobiographical in spirit. He toured with his band, The Abiders, performing soulful renditions that reflected his own philosophy of life: presence, gratitude, and impermanence. Beyond music, Jeff was a passionate painter and photographer. His artworks, often shared quietly rather than publicly, reflected an introspective mind, a man who observed the world not through judgment, but curiosity. His sketches and photographs captured the texture of life on set, the passage of time, and the fleeting beauty of ordinary moments. Spiritually, Jeff Bridges leaned toward mindfulness and acceptance. He practiced meditation, studied Taoism, and embraced philosophies that emphasized balance and compassion. In his writings, particularly his 2013 book The Dude and the Zen Master, co-written with spiritual teacher Bernie Glassman, Jeff explored the intersection of Buddhism, humility and humor, using his iconic The Big Lebowski character, the Dude, as a symbol for letting go and living fully in the present. He wasn't preaching spirituality, he lived it. His laughter, his ease, his compassion toward everyone on set, all stemmed from that centeredness. Those who worked with him often remarked that Jeff had an energy that made people calmer, safer, and more creative just by being around him. What made Jeff Bridges so beloved wasn't just his body of work, it was his authenticity. In an era when fame often demanded performance even off-screen, Jeff refused to wear a mask. Publicly, he was known as the Dude personified, laid-back, wise, endlessly kind. Yet privately, he was more layered, a man who battled self-doubt, who questioned the meaning of success, who worried about his loved ones as any father or husband would. He disliked Hollywood's obsession with image. When he accepted awards, he spoke less about himself and more about gratitude, for his collaborators, his family and life itself. His humility wasn't a pose, it was the result of years of grounding from his parents and the quiet truth that fame fades, but character endures. Still, as the years went by, even Jeff, calm, balanced, grateful, began to sense the weight of time. His body began to ache in ways it hadn't before. The long hours, the travel, the physical demands of acting, each began to take their toll. And although he rarely complained, something was beginning to change within him. The shadows that would soon descend over his life had already begun to gather, unseen but inevitable. There is a point in every great story when the light begins to dim. For Jeff Bridges, that moment arrived quietly, without warning. The man who had spent a lifetime embodying resilience and grace now found himself staring into the most uncertain chapter of his existence. In the years leading up to his 71st birthday, Jeff began to notice subtle changes. Tiredness that lingered longer than it used to, bouts of pain that came and went without reason. At first, he dismissed them as the natural aches of aging. He'd lived an active life, surfing, riding horses, filming demanding roles, and a few physical challenges seemed normal. But as time went on, the fatigue deepened. Simple things, playing music for hours, long walks, even conversations, left him drained. Those close to him noticed the change, but Jeff brushed off their concerns with his usual humor. Just another sign the body's keeping score, he'd say with a wry smile. He continued to work, to create, to live fully. Yet beneath that calm surface, his body was sending signals of something much larger. Something neither he nor anyone around him could yet comprehend. Then came the day that changed everything. In October 2020, Jeff Bridges publicly revealed that he had been diagnosed with lymphoma, a type of cancer that affects the lymphatic system. The announcement came with his trademark humility and lightness. Fans were shocked. The world, used to seeing him as ageless and unshakable, was suddenly reminded of his fragility. But behind the calm tone of his message lay a deeper reality. Jeff was facing one of the most terrifying battles of his life. The diagnosis was more severe than he initially understood. Treatments began immediately. Chemotherapy, countless hospital visits, sleepless nights, and waves of exhaustion. For a man who had always lived in motion, who thrived on creative energy, being confined to a hospital bed was devastating. Yet even in those darkest moments, Jeff never lost his sense of gratitude. He documented his journey in photos, often sharing glimpses of his recovery, not to seek pity, but to inspire. Cancer, he later said, made me realize how precious life is. Every breath feels like a gift. As if battling cancer wasn't enough, the world outside his hospital walls was itself in crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic had just begun sweeping across the globe. Hospitals were overrun. Families were isolated. Fear was everywhere. In 2021, while undergoing chemotherapy and with his immune system weakened, Jeff contracted COVID-19. What might have been mild for someone else became life-threatening for him. The infection struck him with brutal force. His lungs struggled, his oxygen levels plummeted, and suddenly survival, something he had always taken for granted, became uncertain. He later admitted, "I was pretty close to dying." Doctors warned his family that recovery would be long and uncertain. Yet through it all, Jeff never surrendered to despair. In moments of pain, he meditated. When he couldn't move, he visualized himself healing. When he couldn't speak, he listened, to music, to silence, to his heartbeat. After months of struggle, Jeff emerged slowly from the edge. Weakened, frail but alive. The man who had once played heroes and dreamers on screen had now lived through something far more profound. An experience that stripped away every illusion and left only truth. That life, no matter how bright, is unbearably fragile. And yet, even in his suffering, Jeff Bridges carried himself with the same humility that had defined him since childhood. He was not angry, not bitter, only grateful. "The illness taught me that love is the real deal," he said later. "When everything else fades, love is what's left." From that moment on, Jeff's story ceased to be one of mere stardom. It became something deeper, something achingly human, a testament to endurance, gratitude, and the quiet heroism of survival. The tragedy that began with illness would soon unfold into something even more moving, a chapter that would redefine his legacy and touch millions of hearts around the world. There are moments in life that split time into two halves, before and after. For Jeff Bridges, that moment came not on a movie set or in front of a camera, but in a hospital bed, when he found himself staring into the space between living and dying. During his long fight with both lymphoma and COVID-19, Jeff's condition deteriorated to a point where even the doctors were uncertain of the outcome. His body, weakened from months of chemotherapy, was no longer strong enough to fight off infection. He could barely move. Breathing became a battle. Tubes and machines surrounded him, keeping his frail body alive. He later recalled the surreal experience of drifting in and out of consciousness, sometimes unaware of whether he was alive or caught between two worlds. "I remember feeling like I was close to death," he shared later. "Doctors told me I was pretty close to the edge." For a man who had spent his life portraying courage and resilience, it was humbling to experience such vulnerability. There were nights when he wondered if he'd ever walk again, ever play music, or even see his family outside a hospital room. The uncertainty became unbearable. And yet, amid the despair, something extraordinary began to happen. As he lay in silence, disconnected from the noise of the world, Jeff began to feel something deeper than fear: acceptance. Unlike the heroes he often played, Jeff's strength didn't come from defiance, it came from surrender. He didn't fight death with denial, he met it with peace. In those endless hours of stillness, he meditated, focusing on each breath, each flicker of life. He visualized his body healing, his cells regaining strength. He found solace in music, not through loud guitars or rhythmic beats, but in the quiet melodies of existence, the hum of machines, the whisper of oxygen flow, the sound of his own heartbeat. He began to understand what his spiritual practice had been preparing him for all along: the moment of release, the art of letting go. "When you're close to dying, love is revealed in its purest form," he said later. "You realize that everything, every smile, every breath, every touch, is love." Susan, his wife of nearly 50 years, stayed by his side through it all. She read to him, played his favorite songs, and whispered words of encouragement. His daughters sent him videos and messages, reminding him of the world waiting for him beyond those sterile walls. Slowly, Jeff began to recover. His lungs strengthened, his immune system fought back, and his spirit, ever patient, ever grateful, refused to give up. Each step he took in physical therapy became a small miracle. He described the first time he walked unaided again as a rebirth. The actor who had once embodied characters finding redemption now lived his own version of it. Survival, however, came with a cost. When Jeff finally returned home, his body was unrecognizable. He had lost more than 50 pounds during his illness. Simple tasks, walking, climbing stairs, lifting a guitar, felt monumental. The months of illness had also taken an emotional toll. He confessed that there were moments of anger, frustration, and sorrow, not because of what he endured, but because of how much he had missed. He grieved the time lost with his family, the projects postponed, the normalcy that had been stolen by both cancer and the pandemic. But Jeff was not one to dwell on loss. Instead, he treated recovery as a second chance. "This new life is all bonus," he said. "I didn't think I'd get to see my daughter's wedding. And I did." That wedding, his daughter Haley's in 2021, became a moment of profound joy. Though still weak, Jeff walked her down the aisle, holding her arm tightly as tears filled his eyes. It was a quiet triumph, the kind of moment that transcends fame, awards, and recognition. For Jeff Bridges, life after near-death was no longer about achieving, it was about being. Every sunrise, every conversation, every song carried new meaning. He had faced mortality and found not despair, but enlightenment. And though the world would later see him back on screen, those closest to him knew, the man who returned was not the same one who had left. He was softer, slower, infinitely more grateful, a soul transformed by the intimate touch of death and the miracle of survival. When Jeff Bridges finally stepped back into the spotlight, it wasn't as the unshakable icon people remembered, it was as a man reborn. The illness had changed him, but it had not defeated him. If anything, it deepened his artistry, sharpened his sense of purpose, and reminded the world that even legends bleed, fall, and rise again. In 2022, after a long and grueling recovery, Jeff returned to acting with the critically acclaimed television series The Old Man. The role, an aging CIA operative haunted by his past, felt almost autobiographical. The show's themes of survival, regret, and resilience mirrored Jeff's own life. Filming wasn't easy. He required breaks, constant monitoring, and strength he sometimes wasn't sure he had. Yet, every time the cameras rolled, something remarkable happened. The old spark returned. He later said, "I came back thinking, maybe I don't have it anymore. But the moment I started acting, it felt like breathing again." His performance in The Old Man earned him widespread praise and a Critics' Choice Award, with reviewers calling it a masterclass in vulnerability. Fans saw more than just a performance. They saw a man who had literally walked through death and come back to tell the story. Before his illness, Jeff had also returned to one of his most iconic roles, Kevin Flynn in Tron: Legacy, 2010. Though the sequel came decades after the original, his presence carried both nostalgia and wisdom. Younger audiences saw him as a symbol of endurance across generations. Even in smaller projects and voice work, Jeff's later career reflected his gratitude for storytelling. He no longer chased the biggest roles. He chose the ones that resonated with his evolving understanding of life, love, and mortality. Illness has a way of rearranging one's priorities, and for Jeff Bridges, it shifted everything. Fame, awards, and success, once thrilling, no longer defined him. What mattered most now were connection, healing, and presence. He began to speak more openly about his journey, not as a celebrity survivor, but as a man who had learned to slow down and truly live. He embraced his recovery as part of his art. "I see every day as a gift," he said in interviews. "Before, I took health for granted. Now, I see it as grace." He became an advocate for cancer awareness, encouraging others to face illness without shame or fear. His openness inspired countless fans, especially those battling their own diagnoses. The man who had once been known for portraying strength on screen was now showing what real strength looked like in life: gentle, humble, and quietly radiant. His creative work reflected that inner peace. In his music, his voice carried more texture, more heart. In his paintings, his colors grew softer but deeper. In his interviews, he laughed more easily, forgave more quickly, and lived more presently. To his family, Jeff's survival was nothing short of a miracle. His daughters often spoke about the gratitude they felt just hearing his laughter again, seeing him play guitar in the evenings, or walk through the garden with Susan's hand in his. To his collaborators, he became a beacon of quiet courage. Younger actors sought his guidance, not about technique, but about balance. He reminded them to find joy beyond the camera, to nurture love outside the industry's chaos. And to his fans, Jeff Bridges stood as a rare example of authenticity in a world obsessed with image. He didn't hide his scars, he turned them into symbols of perseverance. He showed that even in weakness, there can be incredible power. "The thing about Jeff," said one longtime friend, "is that he never lost himself. Even when everything fell apart, he kept being Jeff, humble, open, grateful." For millions around the world, his journey became more than a Hollywood story. It became a reflection of their own struggles and hopes. His tragedy wasn't defined by loss, but by the beauty of survival. Jeff Bridges, at 75, remains a living reminder that the human spirit, though fragile, is astonishingly strong. His life has been a symphony of light and shadow, laughter and sorrow, endings and rebirths. But even after all the battles, his essence remains unchanged. A man who walks with kindness, who still finds wonder in every sunrise, and who carries the quiet strength of someone who has looked death in the eye and chosen, once more, to live. For years, fans around the world had admired Jeff Bridges for his serene presence and indomitable spirit. Whether on screen or in interviews, he radiated peace. A man seemingly untouched by the darkness that often shadows fame. But behind that calm exterior, Jeff had been walking a path far more fragile than anyone could have imagined. The tragedy that unfolded in his life didn't happen overnight. It crept in quietly, with subtle signs that few noticed. He continued working, smiling, and reassuring fans that all was well. But those close to him, his wife Susan, his daughters, his closest friends, sensed that something was deeply wrong. When the truth finally came out, it sent shockwaves through Hollywood and beyond. The headlines were heartbreaking. The man who had brought so much light into others' lives was facing one of the darkest battles of his own. Jeff Bridges revealed that he had been diagnosed with lymphoma, a form of cancer. It was a revelation that stunned the world, not just because of his fame, but because of how he chose to share it. In his public statement, Jeff was open, gentle, and deeply reflective. "I feel fortunate to have a great team of doctors, and the prognosis is good. I'm profoundly grateful for their support and the love surrounding me." Even in the face of uncertainty, his instinct was to comfort others. But behind those calm words was a storm. Chemotherapy began almost immediately, and the toll was brutal. His once strong body, so full of vitality and grace, was weakened by treatments that left him exhausted and vulnerable. Then came another devastating blow. Jeff contracted COVID-19 while undergoing chemotherapy, leaving his immune system dangerously compromised. For a time, he was hospitalized and gravely ill, his family fearing the worst. In interviews later, Jeff admitted that he came close to death. "I was pretty close to the pearly gates," he said softly. "But the doctors and the love of my family pulled me through." Jeff Bridges survived, but the ordeal left an indelible mark. Recovery was slow, grueling, and emotional. He had to learn how to walk again, how to breathe deeply, how to live without constant pain. His muscles had weakened to the point where even standing up required help. And yet, there was grace in his struggle. His wife Susan never left his side. His daughters became his anchors. Through their unwavering love, Jeff found the strength to heal, not just physically but spiritually. He began documenting his recovery, posting updates that inspired millions. The cancer thing brought on a realization of mortality and how precious life is. Love is the deal. His words struck something deep in the hearts of those who followed his journey. People from around the world, fans, fellow actors, even strangers, sent him messages of hope and gratitude. Jeff had turned his suffering into something larger than himself, a lesson in resilience, humility, and grace. But even with recovery, the cost of his ordeal lingered. The once tireless actor was now more fragile, more introspective. Every public appearance carried a quiet weight. He no longer chased roles or fame, he embraced stillness and gratitude. When news of Jeff's illness and near-death experience broke, the reaction was immediate and emotional. Fans flooded social media with tributes. Celebrities who had worked with him, Matt Damon, Julianne Moore, John Goodman, Haley Steinfeld, spoke with tears about his kindness and generosity. The film community, long known for its competitive edge, came together in unity to honor him. Film festivals replayed his classics, interviews resurfaced where he talked about life, art, and love. It felt as if the entire industry was holding its breath, collectively praying for the man who had given so much beauty to the screen. Even those who had never met him felt the loss deeply. The tragedy wasn't just about illness, it was about witnessing one of Hollywood's most genuine souls face something that stripped him of all illusion, all glamour, and revealed only truth. And that truth was devastating, yet profoundly human. No amount of fame, fortune, or legacy could shield a man from life's cruelest tests. The tragedy of Jeff Bridges is not one of loss alone, it is one of transformation. To understand his story is to see how deeply intertwined joy and suffering can be. What happened to him reminded the world that even those who seem larger than life are still flesh and blood, still bound by time, fate, and fragility. Though his body grew frail, Jeff's spirit only became stronger. He returned to acting, appearing in projects that allowed him to explore themes of resilience and renewal. He worked not for fame, but for connection, for art. When asked what gave him the will to keep going, he smiled gently and said, "Love. That's what it's all about. I've been given so much of it, and I just try to pass it on." That perhaps is the essence of Jeff Bridges' legacy, not the awards, not the fame, but the quiet kindness that defines a truly extraordinary life. His tragedy broke hearts. His recovery healed them. And through it all, he became something rare, a symbol of hope in an age of uncertainty. Jeff Bridges may have faced unimaginable darkness, but he emerged from it with the light of wisdom. His story is not just heartbreaking, it's deeply human. And for millions who look to him as a reflection of grace, courage, and compassion, that is the truest kind of triumph. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful Hollywood story like this one. Jeff Bridges' life reminds us that behind the fame, behind the lights, there's a real human being. Someone who feels, struggles, and loves just like we do. His journey is a symbol of hope, courage, and the beauty of never giving up, no matter how dark the road becomes. Thank you for watching till the end. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter. Stories that inspire, stories that heal, and stories that remind us of what it truly means to live.